Hello. Hi, everyone. It's Monday. Apologies for being a few minutes late here. I was with a client and lost track of time. Thanks for being here. If you're here live, if you're tuning in, thanks for joining. This is a new series I'm doing called Disruption Dilemmas. I get a lot of questions that many leaders are asking me these days because we are living in very disruptive times, and I want to answer some of them. And I enjoy being live with you all. If you have a question that you want me to answer, throw it in the chat or in the comments, depending on if you're joining on LinkedIn or on YouTube. And I'll try my best to answer it. Hopefully, I'll answer it well. And if you have thoughts about the way I answer something, throw those in the chat too. I may or may not bring them into the conversation, depending on how much I like them. Kidding, but also serious. Great. Again, welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is John Hildebrand. I'm an organizational change strategist and executive coach, and I work with leaders who are navigating disruption. And as I mentioned, we are living in very, very disruptive times. I think our lived experience tells us this, and the data tells us this as well. Accenture published a report in 2022 or 23 called the Global Disruption Index. They have a measure of the amount of economic, political, social, technological disruption. And from 2017 to 2022, the amount of disruption increased. I can't remember exactly what the multiple is, but anyway, they measured 2 5-year periods, one from 2011 to 2016, one from 2017 to 2022. And it was exponentially higher for the 5 years from 2017 to 2022. And in the report, they said that companies now face a permanent state of change never seen before. That was in 2023. And we can see this, that the rate and the pace of change that we're experiencing is incredible, and it's very disruptive. And thus, we have a lot of new challenges on our hands as leaders. How do we lead people through change? How do we lead people through unexpected change that's often forced on them from powers that be, from decision makers we've never met before, from technology, from other factors, global factors, right, that we have to learn how to respond to. And that is the basis of my framework, which is called the disruption spiral, which you can watch. I have a few YouTube videos about that, and you can learn the tendencies that arise in organizations when they're hit by disruption and why they lead to dysfunction. And when we're dysfunctional, it's really hard to perform. So ultimately, we need to figure out how we interrupt the direct line between disruption and dysfunction, right? And that's what the disruption spiral does, is it identifies the tendencies that create this downward spiral and offers some suggestions for how you begin to reverse that, and how disruption can potentially even become a catalyst for innovation, for organizational coherence, for stronger relationships, and for learning in evolution. So if you've got questions, please put them in the chat. I will start by answering one question that I've brought myself from my work with clients, because I hear this all the time, and that's the title of the session today. I want to address that question first, and I'm going to get to the questions in the chat and in the comments. So please submit your questions there, and I will get to them. I promise. Okay, so probably the most common question that I get from my clients and in talking with leaders who aren't my clients, but who are navigating disruption is, how do I do everything that needs to get done right now? And this question comes up because when we are disrupted, of course, our workload explodes, because our organizations are trying their best to respond to this change, this unexpected, potentially a regulatory change, new restrictions, right? And what happens is we get number of tasks added to our desk, on our to-do list, right? And then we get meetings scheduled because that's the default, right? So our workload explodes, and leaders come to me and they say, how do I do all this? I don't know that I can do all this. And if you're asking that question, the answer is, well, you probably can't. Not in a sustainable way, at least. Right? Because most leaders are already doing so much. And when they're asked to do 50% more, right? It's like you can't just add 50% more work and not take it from somewhere else, right? Our capacity is not infinite, no matter how we might wish it is, or we might delude ourselves into thinking it is, right? So it's really important to acknowledge that the answer is, well, you probably can't. And I think that begs the question then, well, then what do I stop doing? Which, when you're being disrupted and when the organization is going through disruption and we're all collectively experiencing this threat response, right? Our sympathetic nervous system kicks in with our fight or flight, and we want to eliminate the threat. And the way we do that is, if we're fighting, right? It's like doing more. And that tends to be the response for most leaders and organizations, is do more and do more and do more. What we have to realize is that the sympathetic nervous system asks one question, which is, what do I do? And usually it asks it in a survival way, right? With great urgency and not a lot of strategy. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? This is what I call the big what. And that's the only question that the sympathetic nervous system really knows. And if that is the only question you're asking, you're going to get a very extensive to-do list, and it likely won't be very effective, but you'll be working very hard. So here's a paradox, which is that when you're being disrupted and your workload is exploding, this is precisely when you have to pause. And you have to find a way to regulate yourself, your emotional state, your nervous system, calm yourself by activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and recover response, so that you can think clearly and you can access options. And these options, what I want you to do, what you need to do, is think about what you can eliminate. You need to prioritize, right? And you need to evaluate and push against this, not evaluate, you need to push against our addition bias, because we have a bias to add things when things get more complex. we face a disruption, a big change, and we say, well, I have to do more. Here's what I need to do. And there's a wonderful book called Red Brick Thinking. I don't know if you all have read this. Maybe some of you have, by Donna McGeorge. And Red Brick Thinking is all about how you can eliminate steps, tasks, complexities to simplify and actually find a more elegant solution. And this is really difficult for us to do, if not impossible to do, when we are in sympathetic nervous system overdrive. So again, the paradox here is that when you're being bombarded with more tasks, and this is what I do with clients, that's why coaching is so effective, is they have an hour to effectively talk with me. We do some co-regulation exercises, and I help them to get to that place where we can be strategic about what we can cut out, what we can delegate. Is there an unconditional yes that I've given that I can put some conditions on? I say, yes, I can do that if someone else takes this off my plate, right? Often when we're disrupted, we sort of want to step in and say, yes, I can do it, take on more. Unconditional yeses. It can be a reflexive response for many of us. I know this well. I used to do this often. And that's especially prevalent in mission-driven organizations. I was in higher education for most of my career, and would often just unconditionally say, yes, I can do that. It needs to be done for the sake of the mission, yes. I'm not saying you need to immediately say no to everything, but I want my clients and I want you all to think about, are there conditional yeses that I can give? Conditional yeses usually have a negative connotation here, but I'm going to challenge you to think about them in a positive way, right? Are there ways that you can not wholesale take something on, but you might take a part of something on, right? Or like I said earlier, you could take something on if something else is taken off your plate. And that is, some of these approaches are what allow you to actually manage your workload through so much demand and need for or desire for your attention and your leadership. I use this rubber band a lot. If you've seen my YouTube videos, you've seen me talk about this, but I always encourage my clients to think about responding elastically. So what I mean by that is, if you have your organization is this finger here, right? And then you're here, this finger. If your organization or someone in your organization asks you to do something, many people are, when you're in the sympathetic nervous system overdrive, you're going to be responsive, right? So like the organization is this one, says, I need you to do this. Many people will default to yes and say, okay, I'll do that. And they'll move with all of the requests that they're getting, right? To be reactive. And they forget that this band is actually elastic, right? So let's say the organization or a manager or someone asks you to do something, a colleague asks you to do something. Can you stretch your response a little bit? Can you resist the temptation to immediately say yes, right? When you do that, there's tension on the band, right? I can feel more tension over here. But can you increase your capacity to sit with that tension and then explore what your responses could be, right? Someone asks you to do something. Maybe you initially stay here. Then you go, I can do that. Yes, I can do that. Or maybe I can do that if something else happens, right? Or there's all these other opportunities for us to respond to the request. But when we're defaulting to our reactive response, again, when the sympathetic nervous system is driving, most of us will default to a yes, because the yeses are what have led to us getting our leadership positions, right? Odds are most of us are good at what we're doing. The organization needs us to do it, and it's worked for us in the past, right? Sometimes we default to saying, to giving unconditional yeses and not remembering that we have this whole world of responses that we can explore. And that's often what I'm doing in coaching sessions with clients, is exploring what their options are. The other thing I'll say is many clients say, well, I've already committed to all this work, right? My calendar is overloaded with things that I've already said yes to. And I always like to encourage people that maybe some of these things you have committed to and you can't renegotiate, but almost everything is renegotiable. And if you're coming at it, if you said yes to something and then you get some clarity for whatever reason, if you listen to this or you talk to someone else or whatever, right? Like you had a moment to relax and you realize, I actually don't have capacity for this. You have the ability to initiate a conversation to renegotiate. And I think that capacity is very important in a leader, is to be willing to acknowledge maybe where you have overcommitted and develop the skills, flex the skills to professionally renegotiate, or at least approach that conversation. I think that is so important. And I think my advice to you is, if you are in that space where you say, I can't handle all of this, my advice is find a way to regulate your nervous system first. It has to come first. And then look at what you might eliminate. Red brick it is the verb that Donna McGeorge uses, and I use it with my clients now. What can you red brick? What can you get rid of? Or what can you delegate? What can you stop doing? And are there conversations that you need to have to renegotiate? And if so, think about how you're going to do that. But that is, to me, the way out if you are overwhelmed with tasks amid change. Wonderful. Okay, I want to bring up some questions. Susan, hi, thank you for asking your question. You asked it a while ago, so thanks for your patience with my response. What does the report define as disruption? I mentioned the Global Disruption Index earlier that Accenture put out. And then a follow-up question. I think I know what you mean by disruption. I feel like many of the disruptions can be great opportunities and ideas, but how do we decide what great things we just don't have time or resources for? So to answer your first question, I haven't looked at it in a while, and I don't know exactly how they define it. Let me see if I can look it up here, and I can give you a better answer than Accenture Global Disruption. If you just look up Accenture Global Disruption Index, this is a great read. It's 5 minutes. This is the one from 2023, by the way. I recommend it. I don't know if I'm going to have a good answer for you right now, as in terms of what the report defines as a disruption. I think about disruption as a consequence, a change that either is forced or initiated in an organization that has consequential impacts on the way that you go about delivering service or products. The disruptions that I most often see are things like funding cuts, organizational restructuring, leadership change, regulatory change, or legal structure change that impacts what you're doing. There could be like natural disasters that impact how an organization functions. Those are some of the disruptions. The categories that they identify, I'm actually struggling to find the link that I'm looking for. But if you look up the 2022 or 2023 report from Accenture, there's a bunch of different categories where they talk about and give some examples for the disruptions that they measured. Now, your second question, how do we decide what great things we just don't have time or resources for? I mean, it's a great question. And I think it depends on what you have the capacity for and the stomach for, frankly. I think that some people, by the way, I'm also a Clifton Strengths coach, so I'm thinking about it through this lens. Like some people are wired for disruption, change, adaptability, right? There's like an inherent desire for and capacity to navigate through ambiguity, through the unexpected. There's like an energetic response to when things are uncertain, whereas other people are more inclined to predictability, to knowing what's coming, order, right? So I think there's the time or resources question. That's what comes up for me is some people I think have a bit more of a capacity for change in general. And it doesn't mean that we're not all capable of becoming better change leaders, but that's one thing. And I think you have to understand first. The second thing is what is outside of your control, right? Like some of these disruptions you don't have the option to opt out of. So understanding what is within your control, what is outside of your control that we need to accept, and is there a gray area in between that maybe you as a leader or your team or your organization can influence the disruption, but you ultimately can't control it. So that's an exercise that I do with a lot of leaders and teams, is just a simple 3-column exercise where we're sorting the factors that are impacting you and putting them into 3 columns. What is squarely within your control, what is completely outside of your control, and what has the capacity to be influenced. And that determines what we have to respond to or what we have to accept, and what maybe we don't have to accept and we can control for ourselves. I hope that's helpful. I know I've been working with a lot of leaders recently who work in the international education space, and there's a US government regulatory change that happened recently that is very consequential, that impacts how all offices, the university, international student and scholar offices, can deliver their service to their students and scholars. And that's a classic example of a place where I encourage leaders and teams to practice acceptance, no matter how much you disagree with the regulatory change or the policy change. What happens is likely outside of your influence, right? So the more we resist, then the less creative we can get in terms of responding to the disruption, and ultimately, using that disruption as an opportunity, as Susan, as you mentioned, as an opportunity or a catalyst for evolution and change. Susan, yeah, I think that is the right one. I looked at that link and it looks different than the last time I looked at it. I'm going to try to find it here. Maybe this is it. There's a specific visual that I'm not seeing on this that I'm looking for that shows the areas of disruption they measure. So I have the visual here. I don't know how to share this with you all. There's a visual that shows the disruption they measure in economic, social, geopolitical, climate, consumer, and technological spaces. So if you can find that, it's a image with a bunch of line graphs, and I found that to be very helpful. And there are some other versions. Let me do some searching. If you are interested in this, send me an email and I will find the right report to send to you all. So that's my take on parts of what we're talking about in terms of disruption, what disruption is, and how we can evaluate what we're responding to and how we're responding, what we are responding to and what our response is when we do so. And I think a lot of it just depends on, what are we able to influence and what are we not able to influence. The other thing I want to add here is there's a wonderful researcher who I highly recommend, who's influenced a lot of my thinking. Her name is Dr. Nadia Jekshenbayeva. I think I can post here. Good, that comment went up. So look up Nadia's research. She is incredible. She is, as I mentioned, I've had the opportunity to learn a lot from her. Her wheelhouse is in organizational reinvention, and she talks a lot about. She's actually the one who introduced me to the Accenture report. Look up Nadia's stuff. She is wonderful. She does some really high quality learning events that I recommend for anyone, whether you work in an organization or you work independently. There's a lot of applicable stuff here. Brendan, thanks for being here. The Serenity Prayer is one of the most helpful strategies with all the disruption in public policy and government administration right now. Yes. For those of you who don't know the Serenity Prayer, see if I can remember it. Grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, and I'm on the spot live. Someone else can do it better than I can. But yes, I think such a great call out, Brendan, and it's exactly what I was talking about, right? I'm going to read it here. The nice thing about being at my laptop is I can look it up. So the Serenity Prayer is when you ask to be granted the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. In that last part, it's all good, but the wisdom to know the difference is sometimes difficult to access. And it's not because you don't have the wisdom, it's because you're overwhelmed. And it's really hard to access the wisdom when our fight or flight nervous system response is activated. We all have examples of times where we've said, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Why did I react that way? That's why you reacted that way. Because the sympathetic nervous system was driving the bus, right? So in the Serenity Prayer, what I'll say about the Serenity Prayer, whether you have a religious practice or not, it's a great reminder, and it actually serves for many people to be the activator for the parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and recover nervous system that allows us to connect to the wisdom, is even just the practice of saying the prayer or meditation, whatever you want to call it, right? But such a helpful addition there. I agree, Brendan. If you have more questions or thoughts, keep them coming. I want to just address one more really quickly that I often hear from my clients. And this is about trust and credibility when things keep changing. I realize I have a banner I can put up here. So leaders are often asking me, John, I just told my team something last week, and we've gotten more information that, invalidates or totally changes what I told them last week. And how do I maintain trust and credibility when things keep changing? And look, my first response to this is always like, you can't know what we don't yet know, right? So being really upfront about what the situation is. If there is information that is in flux, or if you're responding to something that is speculative or not finalized, and you're operating on that information, be upfront about that, right? We're taking the best course of action that we, as of the information we know right now. This is the plan. This is what I think we should do, right? And I think communicating and making sure that the people that you lead understand that the information could change is essential. Most people are reasonable, like hyper prescience or the ability to read the future, right? So they understand, right? But I think it's a matter of communicating this consistently in a way that people can hear, and reminding them, right, that this is an evolving situation and we can and will respond if that changes. I think holding, like standing, if you're in a situation that is consequential, you're navigating a disruption and you know the information is, you don't have all the information right away, set up a standing sort of sequence of communications where you can clarify what is still the case, what information has changed, right? Maybe that's weekly, monthly, I don't know. It depends on what the situation is, but a regular cadence that allows you to update people and tell them, to clarify what is still relevant and what has changed. And going back to what we were just talking about, being really clear about what you can control and what you can't control, and only committing to the things you can control. Right? If there are outcomes that are way beyond your level of influence, do not commit to the outcome. Right? What you can commit to is what you're responsible for and what you're in control of, right? How will you respond? How will the team respond? How will the organization respond if you have that level of influence, right? But only commit to what you can control. When you're committing to things beyond your control, and of course, inevitably the situation doesn't play out the way that you've committed to, you've lost trust and credibility. So be careful and be intentional about what you commit to. One very simple practice that I encourage my leaders to do is become more comfortable saying, I don't know yet. Many of us grew up in organizations and were maybe mentored by leaders who were not willing to say, I don't know. And when we're not willing to say, I don't know, if we don't know, then we commit to things and we start eroding trust by committing to things we can't guarantee. Right? I don't know yet, but we're looking into it. I don't know yet, but we'll communicate as soon as we know. It requires some humility, but it also frees you of these commitments that you can't deliver on, right? And those are often what erode trust and credibility the most in disruption. I think another idea here, if you're in an organization where there are other leaders who are involved in other parts of this response, to bring them in. Like, can you bring in other leaders to communicate the message that things are changing so that it's not so easy to individualize to you if there's changing information? If there are others involved in a organizational response that is pivoted, right? Can you present this information together? Can you present this information as a united, for example, an executive leadership team or a shared leadership team or something, so that they're seeing the information come from multiple people? What that does is it combats the tendency in the disruption spiral to over individualize, which often happens in disruption. People often point at leadership, leaders. And when you bring in more people, you actually introduce a bit more complexity to people's understanding of what's happening. They're hearing it from different voices, different perspectives, right? And they're understanding that there are more contributors to the response than just one individual. Those are some ideas, but I think the most important factor here is being very clear and continuously communicating and being willing to identify where you don't know and being clear about where you don't know. And when things change, be really upfront about where they've changed. And if you have consistent touch points, that can help. Okay. I just noticed that I can't share comments on LinkedIn, which is interesting. So I shared Dr. Nadia Zeksambayeva's contact information or her name on YouTube. I'll just type it into a banner really quickly if you're interested in her work. Check out her stuff. She's amazing. There's a lot of good, really, really great thinkers in the space. She's certainly one of them. Let me know if you have other questions. I'm going to do this fairly frequently. So if you have questions that you want me to answer, you can send me a message or you can join us live. If I've said something here, if you're watching this back and you're curious about something, please send me an email or a message on LinkedIn. My email address. One more time. Make a quick banner here. John@johnhildebrand.com. I always love hearing from you all. Let me know what's resonating. If you want me to talk about something specific or give more examples, whatever, like let me know what's helpful. And I like doing this. So let me know your thoughts and I will look forward to talking to you all soon. I'll be in touch. I'll announce the next time I'm doing this on LinkedIn and in my newsletter. So if you're not on my newsletter, send me an email. I'll get you subscribed and I will talk to you all soon. Be well. Take care. We'll talk soon.